In 2021, Jakarta became the first city in Southeast Asia to be awarded the Sustainable Transport Award. In today's lecture, we are hoping that Pak Anies will address some of these initiatives, as well as to address the challenges that a mega city like Jakarta will continue to face into the future. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pak Anies Baswedan.
Thank you, Professor Susana, for a very generous introduction. Professor Kanti Bajpai and all faculty members of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Mr. Ambassador, who are with us today, and all participants. It is indeed a privilege and honor for me to be here this afternoon, come back to Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy and had the opportunity to share some of our works. And yes, Jakarta has many challenges. I'll share a few. But coming to Singapore is truly a break. It's really a break. Coming to a city without worrying about water, without worrying about any of the challenge. I'm as visitors, because if you're in Jakarta, you travel, and then as much as you are observing the city, you're also thinking what needs to be fixed, what needs to be developed. But here we are visiting, and you don't have to worry about anything here in Singapore. So it's good to be back in Singapore, and I'm privileged with this opportunity to share some of the things that we're doing. Let me sort of share some of the big pictures of our challenge in Jakarta. Jakarta is a city with 11 million population. So when it comes to some of the key features, we have 11 million people, and plus around 23 million in surrounding. So a total around 35 millions. That's Jakarta greater area. And the size of Jakarta itself is only 660 kilometers square. So basically 20 by 30 kilometers square. And we contributed 17% of our national GDP. So with the larger area, it's no less than 25% of the national GDP is in that area. So it is a city that is significant to Indonesia, and many challenges that we have. If I may say so, there's 4 big issues that whenever we're doing surveys, what are things that concern most to our resident? Number 1 would be cost of living. Number 2 would be healthcare. Number 3, education, employment. These are top 4 issues that our populations has always responding whenever there is a survey. And unfortunately, flood is never on the top list. Or fortunately, there is a global challenge that city like us is facing. 1, we're talking about climate change. And then 2, we're talking about, a more livable city. And this is sort of issues across the globe. We're talking about how can we make our city more livable? Because more and more people are living in the urban area. As of today, in Indonesia, we have around 56% of our population living in the urban area. And it is projected that by 2050, 75% of Indonesians will be living in the urban area. So we have these big challenges. And then those 4 challenges that I mentioned earlier. Surveys to our residents have come up with 4 issues. 1 is living costs. 2 is about health. 3 is about education. And 4 is about employment. So when it comes to living costs, what are the structure here? 1 is food. 2 is housing. 3 is mobility. These are components that are so critical when it comes to cost of living. When it comes to health, we're talking about coverage or insurance. And then education and employment. I'll talk about all of that. I'll address this first issue first. Because if you talk to people in Jakarta, what will be the most pressing issue? Everybody will talk about cost of living. That's number one. And then on the first issue is food. We imported food from outside. So 99.9% of food available in the household of Jakartans are coming from outside the city. So ensuring food supplies is truly extremely critical to us. So when I was asked, Pak Anies, what is in your mind every day in the morning when you wake up as a governor? Then my reply would be, is the food price change? Not flood, not traffic. It's been there for years. But this is one factor that if it changes, if it increases, it's not only affecting Jakartans, but across Indonesia. The inflations that Jakarta can contribute is significant. So on this, we organize, we're talking about policies. Our approach is to divide between supply and demand. On the supply side, we had state-owned enterprises to manage supply of food. And then we have our bureaucrats in the departments to measure demands and to sort of extrapolate, project demands. In the past, these two, the bureaucrats and the state enterprise, were working together. Some were working on the supply side, some were working on the demand side. Since 2018, we divided into the two. The state-owned enterprises focus on supply, and the departments is focusing on demand. And none is working on the same issue. For example, when the company here, talking about supply, they form collaborations with certain region in Indonesia to produce rice, for example. In the past, that kind of collaborations are happening between our company and our Department of Food. And because of that, there is mismanagement issues. So that's two. And then number two is to make sure that food market is efficient. And to do that, we have an application called IPJ, Indeks Pangan Jakarta. So if any of you had the opportunity, download that application. It's called Index IPJ, Info Pangan Jakarta, and on that application, this is the applications, you will be able to see all commodities and the price change at real time. Why do we need this? This is in order to create a symmetric information within the market. That is how government intervene, not by subsidies, but by creating efficient market. So what price is reflected here? It's a wholesaler market, Pasar Induk Ramadjati. Pasar Induk Ramadjati is where all agricultural product is coming to Jakarta. It'll come to this one big market. By knowing the price there, we know exactly the difference between Pasar Induk and the retail store, the warung in the kampung. And by having this information transparent, we're able to create a more efficient market for food. So we rely on market, but government intervene by providing this and ensuring there is time in which we need to intervene. When we need to intervene, we're intervening at the wholesaler market so that the supply is stable. So that's one. Two, housing. On housing, there's two things here. There's not enough space there, so I'll use this here. I divided into two issues here. With regard to housing, there is home seeker, house seeker, those who wanted to have a house, and those who already have homes. We have two different policies here. Why I divide into two? Jakarta is the only area in Indonesia in which price of land were increasing significantly, and sometimes exponential level. So the price of land is truly increasing. Why? Because there is limited land, and prices keep going up. And one of the driver for that increase of price is our property tax. So government is very effective in increasing price of land in Indonesia, in Jakarta, by introducing policies that, from our perspective, we'd like to increase our revenue from tax by giving property tax much higher rate. But on the other hand, it has effect on people that the price of land increasing, many unable to pay the tax. So for this, the tax policy we introduced to ensure that they're able to stay where they are. On house seekers, for the one with purchasing power that is high, and those in the middle, and then those who are low income. The approach are different. For those with high purchasing power, we let the market to operate. You know, you have this advertisement of new houses, new flats, new dormitory and things like that. That's through the market mechanisms. But those in the middle and the low income, they have difficulties entering the market and getting home. So on this area, we created a project. It's called Zero Down Payment Project. This is for those who are earning from minimum wage up to 15 million. Minimum wage is 4.6 million rupiah, which is in dollars, 400 Singapore dollars, up to 15 millions. 15 millions would be 1,500. So that's the range. Those who are making that level of monthly income, they are able to engage on a mortgage, on payment, monthly payment, but most of the time they didn't have the money for down payment. So we created a zero down payment project. So you don't have to pay the zero down payment, but the monthly installment they'll be able to do. That's for the second. And then for the low income is rental flat. And in the past 5 years, we built all of this. We built around 33 towers to help facilitate this segment of our society. And then the last one is for the homeowners of Jakarta. We have been seeing migrations on a regular basis and rather structural. Those who used to live in the middle relocating outside the city and selling their lands, many of them because they're unable to afford the property tax. If any of you were monitoring news from Indonesia, about a few weeks ago, there's a phenomenon called Citayam Fashion Week. Citayam Fashion Week, with the youth were coming. We did it. We researched a little bit further. Many of these teenagers were there. Their childhood were in the neighborhood. Their parents were relocating to Citayam area, to Depok area, to outside the city. So when they're going back to their area, it's actually they're going back to their old neighborhood because they used to live around that area. So the story behind the lesson behind this is that if we are allowing property tax to continue rising in Jakarta, we will be basically punishing the old residents who live in the strategic area for decades, for generations, because they're no longer able to afford a property tax in that area. So our approach is that then we provided a tax break for anyone that own homes below 2 billion rupiah. The property tax is zero. Above that, then property tax being introduced. So that's on the housings. Now on the mobility. On the mobility, let me give you an illustrations. I'll talk further about this. We have 11 million people and we have 13 million motorized vehicles. So we have more motors than people. So on mobility, we are facing quite a serious challenge. 4 million people commuting daily, 3.5 million cars, 16 million motorcycles in an area that is so small. So mobility is an issue. That's why we have traffic congestion, and sometimes it's a gridlock. And we need to do something about it. So our approach on this is we look at the ecosystem. So we have a lot of public transport operating in our city. And then this is passengers. And government here, we are sort of regulator. And we're doing enforcement of minimum service requirement. So these are operators of our public transport. We have no less than 25 operators. Mikrolet, Metro Mini, Kopaja, and all those brands that, you remember all those names. And they are operating individually. And then you have passengers here, and they have transaction every day. So when I came to office, I said, there's no way we can improve our public transport if we do not adopt one word. It's called integration. We need to integrate this into a single system. Because this is operating on its own. How do we work on that? So all these operators, I called them for a meeting. It was early 2018. And I invited them for this meeting. I said, we would like to have an integrated public transport, and it's called Jaklingko, and we would like to work together with you. I must say it was the most heated meeting I ever attended. Oh boy, yes, indeed. All the operators and the management of that, they're coming to us, and they're well, sir, thank you for the invite. This is first time we're invited. And two, they're extremely upset to us. Why? Because we are operators, and we are also regulators, and we're not being fair. On the one hand, we have Transjakarta, that is our company. On the other hand, we are a regulator that set the standards and set the routes and everything. So they're suffering because of that system. So I told them we would like to work together, and we would like to create a system that is fair, and an ecosystem that is fair. And finally, the meeting was over, and they're willing to work together. And this is the plan that we presented to them. So all these operators, you're no longer receiving payment from passengers. Okay? All is gone. So this is the government part. We will be your off-taker. We'll pay your service. And we'll pay your service per kilometers. And every day you have to go through the routes that is designated to them. It's about 100 kilometers per day, plus minus 10 kilometers. That's tolerated. And then we're going to pay you by kilometers. Okay? On the other hand, with the passengers, they're paying to us 10,000 rupiah. It used to be 5,000 rupiah, 10,000 rupiah for 3 hours ride. So you can take a microbus at 7 o'clock in the morning. You can transfer to any public transport until 10 o'clock and no additional pay, and you can transfer anywhere. So we integrated the routes, we integrated the payment system, and we integrate the management in a way, because all of them operate under Transjakarta. And with that approach, we are able to see some changes. Number one, the microbuses in Jakarta who are operating under this scheme, they're no longer doing ngetem. Ngetem is waiting for passengers, because they're not being paid by numbers of passengers. Number two, there is no longer routes that is, in bahasa Indonesia, it's called rute basah and rute kering. Wet routes and dry routes. Dry routes meaning no passengers there, because they're no longer worried about how many passengers were riding, because they will be paid based on the kilometers. And then on top of that, they can have a contract with us, and they can go to the bank and renew the fleets. So today, if you come to Jakarta, try to find the old Metro Mini. If you can find one, I'll take you for dinner. Because the old Metro Mini is gone. Not that we put a restriction, but because they have contract with us, they're able to renew and get a better fleet for their own. It's an ecosystem that is being fixed, not only about fixing the, the routes being extended and everything. And then on top of that, the passengers. And with that approach, we're able to double our coverage. We used to cover Jakarta for about 42% of Jakarta was covered. And in 3 years, it increased to 82%. Now it's 90% of area in Jakarta was covered by public transport. But in order to meet this agreement, it takes 88 meetings and 6 months of negotiations with all these operators. And these operators were very outspoken. These are not groups that is, these groups are very outspoken. And 88 meetings, and we agreed on that system. And then on top of that, we're talking about increase of ridership. Let me show you some of the data on that. From around 350,000 to 1 million per day in terms of ridership. So I often said, if we double the fleet, it means we have the fiscal power to increase the number of buses. But if we increase ridership, it means there is a change in the behavior of the public. And what we are seeing here is a change. And you saw the number earlier, that the daily commuter is about 4 million. So our target was reaching 4 million by 2030. Not by next year, but 2030. So the trajectory is we are into that directions. We are seeing positive trends on this. However, it needs to continue. It must not stop there. Same thing with the annual ridership too. So, and this is the area that used to be covered. It used to be around 42% of Jakarta covered by public transport. When this data was made, it was in 2021, it was 82%. Now we're covered 90%. And with that, mobility issue that we talk about here is handled. Why? Because family spending on mobility can take up to 30% of family spending for mobility. And our target is to reduce this to 8%. This is even higher when we have increase in fuel prices like past few weeks. By having public transport in the city, we can absorb the shock because the public can take public transport and don't have to worry about the change in fuel prices. But if you're not relying on public transport, then you're heavily affected by the change in fuel prices. And I think this should be the pattern that cities across Indonesia are taking. Building, developing public transport. We have not done so for so many decades. Our approach is this. When it comes to mobility, it's your own business. We build the road, you decide what kind of vehicles you have. You may have cars, you may have motorcycles, but that's your decision. The state provide no public mobility when it comes to inner city mobility, and that needs to stop. And that's what Jakarta has been doing in the past few years, is by integrating that and saying public transport is no longer, quote, a delegated authority to the household, but we take it over. We will be taking responsibility on people's mobility within the city. And there is a higher purpose more than this, more than about traffic jams and simply transportation issue. We are addressing this challenge, climate change, immediately. Why? Of course, it's obvious. When we take public transport, then less usage of private vehicles, then we are seeing less greenhouse gas emission. And in fact, we are seeing a good statistic on that. We have targeted 30% reductions of greenhouse gas emissions in our city by 2030. And now we are in 2022, 8 years to go, and we have achieved 26%. So we are ahead of our target, and we'd like to continue on that. So we address that issue. Number two is we're talking about a city from the environment point of view, which is healthier, but also a society that feel a sense of unity, sense of togetherness. You know, if any of you have spent time in Jakarta and contemplate a little bit, our city is actually a somewhat segregated city, where there is kampung, packed, crowded, hot, humid, and then you have complex, in which, area in which nice housing were there, and then you have main business districts with nice offices, and then next to it you have slum area. So there is that segregation without us realizing, and it's naturally evolved. So, as someone who took this responsibility, I thought we need to address this problem. We should not let this problem continue, but the way to address it is not in a traditional way. So our approach in addressing this issue is by creating this public transport. And when public transport were operating, it is a facility that creates equal treatment. You may be CEO, you may be a governor, you may be a mayor. When you enter an MRT, when you enter a bus, you will stand on the same line. You will sit on the same chair, you will stand on the same car, and there is no business lounge, there is no business class, it's all equal. And in a city like Jakarta, that is a rare experience. Even when you go to malls, many of you know Bundaran HI area. There are 3 malls in Bundaran HI. One is Plaza Indonesia, the second is Grand Indonesia, and the third, any of you knows the third malls? Tamrin City, right. Tamrin City. Yes, there is EX too, north of it. So those who come to Tamrin City did not dare to enter Plaza Indonesia. And the same thing, those who come to Plaza Indonesia didn't even look at Tamrin City. This is a completely different segment of our society. What we like to do is to create space that give a feeling of equality, that create a feeling of unity. And that's why we built many, what we call third space. Let me wipe this. So third space, in the case of Jakarta, was this. First space is at home, second space is at work, and the third space is our common space. This is the space. And in the past, this has been mostly provided by private sectors. And when private sectors create third space, they have to create a certain market targeting. They could not create just for anyone. And that's why we're doing reforms, public transport, 2 parks, 3 sidewalks, that all were developed because we would like to build a third space that unite, a space that create a feeling of equality to all. We're talking about public transport, and then we build public parks, no less than 370 public parks, 29 urban forests, and the idea is to make sure that our population is able to find a third space that create the feeling of equality. Even on pedestrian may look nothing new for you in Singapore, but in Jakarta, for example, we didn't have sidewalk for so many years. We didn't have sidewalks for so many years. And I remember when I come to office, I had gathering with all our staff. We have a meeting on this and on transportation, and I asked a simple questions. What kind of transportation tools that everyone has? And the answer was motorcycles. And I said, no, it's your foot. Our foot is our number one transportation tools. And if we in government assume that transportation tools has to be with wheels, then we only build road. We don't build sidewalks. So we build sidewalks. And when we started building sidewalks, of course, the reaction was quite strong because you're taking up space for cars. Jalan Sudirman was the most obvious, but we didn't develop only in Jalan Sudirman. No less than, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was around 240 kilometers of sidewalks across the city. 241 kilometers, to be exact, of sidewalks across the city, bike lanes. So we try to sort of shift the paradigm that in a city, we need to have public transport, we need to have sidewalks, we need to have bicycle lanes in a modern city settings. So that has been our approach. Anyway, I went quite lengthy on the issue of mobility because this is one of the most pressing issue in Jakarta. Now, education, I'm not going to go too far on this, but what we did was enrollment system was reformed. So now we are seeing our schools having more diverse students. What I mean by diverse is this. In the past, many of our schools, especially those who were being suggested by the general public as good schools, were only enrolling or accepting students from the privileged families. Now, everyone has equal opportunity. That's on the enrollment part. But this, we will not be able to see the result in the next 2 to 3 years. The result will be in the next decades when we started to see them moving up the ladder in the socio-economic ladder. And then on health, it used to be around 73% of Jakartans covered by health insurance. Now it's 99%. It's about commitment. Our approach is this. Anyone come to hospital, they didn't have insurance, immediately you're covered if you have Jakarta ID. So we are registering everyone. And we required Lurah. Lurah is the head of sub-districts. Okay? They have to make sure that all the residents within their area were 100% covered by health insurance. If we found anyone not covered, their performance report will be marked. And if it is marked, your pay will be reduced. So they're working very hard to make sure that their population is fully covered. And with that, we're able to cover 99%. Why it's not 100%? This is what happened. So many people who used to live in Jakarta were relocating to outside the city. They did not want to give away their KTP. So if you use Jakarta KTP, you move to Depok, you still want to keep Jakarta KTP for whatever reason that is. And because of that, they are always disturbing our statistics in a way. Is any of you keeping Jakarta ID? Yeah, because so many are having that. And then the last on employment, our approach is helping small businesses, micro businesses, to have access to market. And we have a program called Jakpreneur. But the idea is linking them to the market, assisting them with financing, with management training, with mentoring, so that they can grow. And we're grateful that we have grown micro businesses up to the number of around 380,000 in the past 5 years, and they are very much benefiting from the digital market that is growing in our city. We have a project of giving away IUMK. IUMK is Izin Usaha Mikro Kecil and tax ID. So many of those household entrepreneurs, they didn't have permits, they didn't have tax ID. Because of that, they're not able to participate in this digital market. And why they could not have the permits and the tax ID? Because they're operating in a zone that, according to government, is not for business. But this is household, like you're making cookies, you're making, food for breakfast, for lunch. It's not the traditional business it used to be. So we then bypass that and saying that as long as it is micro and ultra micro, then you can operate anywhere in the city, and we give away the permits. So, and this is also because of the pandemic, we sort of waived that requirement from 58,000 to 252,000 business permits were given in the past 2 years. This is during the pandemic. Anyway, let me end here. But let me not conclude, but give an underlying issue here. We have big challenges, such as climate change. We have big challenges like making more livable cities, but we have also challenged demand for the public to address these 4 basic issues: living costs, health, education, employment. In a city that is complex like Jakarta, we cannot say we can only address 1 or 2. We have to address all. And we have to address it in ways that solving living costs is also solving climate change problem. Solving the issue of mobility is also solving the issue of unity, creating the feeling of equality. So all needs to be linked to one another. Anyway, let me end my opening here, and I'm happy to entertain any comment, questions that you have. Thank you.
Hello, Pak Anies. Good evening. I'm Pandito. I'm from Indonesia. Actually, I was working 4 years before I came here for Transjakarta, so I knew the story. I was just want to ask.
Your name again?
Pandito. Yeah. I would just want to ask your tremendous good job on reforming transport, but the debate is always on whether you are subsidizing for citizen or you're subsidizing for operator, because the cost of subsidy for transport is growing rapidly compared to the passengers. So now we have like 3 to 4 trillion. How do you manage this, those delicate balance between subsidizing for operator or subsidizing for the passenger? Thank you.
Thank you. And you're with the school, right?
Yeah, I'm an MPP senior.
You're an MPP senior. Excellent. Okay. We'll take the second question here. For the gentleman behind and then the one in front.
Selamat sore, Mas Anies. My name is Chrysler. I'm within the school. Chrysler. I can concur the enjoyment experience when walking in the sidewalk of Jakarta. I used to work in Jalan Sudirman. But what I'm interesting in question is that despite the innovation that you introduce, how do you empower the bureaucrats so they can put the innovation stage? They don't throw away the sidewalk when you left the office. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Zana. My name is Paul Lim. I'm from Malaysia. So my questions to Pak Anies would be about the Indonesia and China relationship, particularly in the Build and Road initiative, as Bandung and Jakarta HHR is one of the landmark project in the it's ongoing landmark project in the Jakarta, and we see significant progress.
Oh, the high speed.
Yes, HHR. We see significant progress after President Jokowi visited Beijing in July. So, as you are one of the forerunner of the coming presidential cabinet, so And you might be dealing with greater challenges, for instance, the state-to-state relations. So what are your views on the BRI in Jakarta and Indonesia? Thank
The
you.
BRI initiative. Thank you very much.
PRI.
BRI. The Belt and Road.
Okay.
I take one more question from the lady who's standing
Yeah,
there, and
sure.
then we'll let you answer.
Hello, good evening. My name is Carla. I'm from the Philippines and I'm MPP Junior. So I think our countries share the history of having a very car-centric society. So my question is that, what led to the pivot or the shift from a car-centric policy to a more focused on public transportation? Because this is something that we also want to do in the Philippines. Was there any focusing event that led to that moment of pivoting from that policy to solving public transportation?
All right, thank you.
This is a slide answer.
So I hand it over to you to answer the 4 questions.
Yeah,
And they're
yeah.
very big ones, actually.
Yes, they're big questions. Yeah. First with Pandito, thank you. Very good questions. Yes, in the short run, if I may say, in the short run, it looks like we are subsidizing the operators in the short term. Why that is the case? One, our ridership has not reached the target we would like to reach. And this is like a chicken and egg problem. Do you want to invite more partners into the business of public transport? You need to have high ridership. And then to have high ridership, you have to invest on making sure that the fleet were available and reaching out to all area of Jakarta. So in our model is this: we invested now, we subsidize, and this will continue to grow. And as it grows, we will then rely on non-fare box revenue. Instead of like today, we're relying on fare box revenue, and the difference is being subsidized. So we are pretty sure that as this continue, we will be seeing that trend. Number 2 is on the TOD development. The TOD development will bring in a lot of investment, and it will also change the equations on the public transport expenses. Why that is the case? Because master developer of TOD has to be our company, which is MRT or Transjakarta. So they will be able to make money not only through the revenues from non-fare box and the fare box, but also from the property and the business of TOD. So that's one. Number 2, how to maintain this sidewalk so that it continue? Mana Bapak tadi, Pak? Okay, Pak, thank you. Yeah, Jalan Jenderal Sudirman is now a place in which I often call it democratization of Jalan Sudirman. Because in the past, only someone like you can enjoy that big street, wide street, and high-rise buildings. The rest of Jakartans could never enjoy Jalan Sudirman because there is no sidewalks. Now, not only sidewalks, we built pedestrian bridge and bicycle bridge so that people can actually come and enjoy that place. So you come to Jalan Sudirman not only during car-free day, which is only on Sunday, but now any time of the day, any day, you can come and you can enjoy that street. Imagine when you live in a kampung, very crowded, very compact, you like to see, a common space that is accessible and free. So when we build sidewalks, the idea is not only about, pedestrian need to be a priority, but we are also talking about making our resident who lives in the kampung can enjoy the city as much as those who don't live in the kampung. So you're seeing our parks, our sidewalks in the afternoon and evening were occupied by so many people. Some of them are coming from outside Jakarta and enjoying the area. How that's being maintained? Number one is translate that into long-term planning document. So that's already on the planning document. Number two, put that into called Provincial Strategic Project, KSD, Kegiatan Strategik Daerah. And with that, it has to be translated into budget and it has to be translated into action. I think now people in the area that we have pedestrian sidewalks can share their experience in a positive way. In the past, I remember when we start building the first project on this was non-Jenderal Sudirman, was Kemang area and Cikini. In the Kemang area, oh my God, the rejection was so strong. They don't want to have a pedestrian. They don't like to have their parking space taken for sidewalks. And these are groups who are highly educated, highly connected. So both are problems when we're having, they have all the argument from the other side. We come up with an offer. Give us 3 meters of your land and we'll give you extra floor for your building. That was the offer. We're not paying for your land. The land is still your property, but we're going to take it for sidewalks and we're going to give you extra floors. So some are getting 2 floors, extra 2 floors, some are getting, depending on the size, some are getting 3 floors, and they're happy. That was the initial happiness. But we need the sustainability of happiness, right? What happened is, I'm giving an illustration. When you come to a mall, you take your car and you park. After you park, you walk in the malls and trying to decide which restaurant you will eat as you walk, right? But when you go to area of like Kemang, you decide which restaurant and then you park. You decide the restaurant first. Why? Because there is no pedestrian. As soon as we created the pedestrian, what happened was they park and they walk and decide which restaurant to visit. So what happened was not only restaurants that have big parking lot that enjoy high occupancy, but also all restaurants in the area were enjoying that. So there is that effect. So we hope by having this institutionalized, we will be able to maintain sustainability of sidewalk development project in Jakarta. But let me note, it is already 241 kilometers. Unfortunately, most pictures were coming from Jalan Sudirman. So people are saying, Pak Anies, don't only build Jalan Sudirman. It is not Jalan Sudirman only, but it is actually across the city. One problem that we need to counter is this. We need to educate our motorists not to use sidewalks for two-wheelers. That is something that we need to, we still find difficulties on that. Even in Kota Tua. Kota Tua is now completely for pedestrian, but the challenge is the motorists were still riding there. And when they fall, they blame it the governor. Pak Gubernur, licin. Of course, it's not designed for motorists. But anyway, that is our challenge. Now, I'm still governor right now. And I'm continuing to be governor until end of October. Yeah. So perhaps, on the next session, if there is another opportunity, I'll address that challenge, okay? But, boleh ya? But in general, I'm not going to talk about the PRI in specific, but if I may, like looking at the case of Jakarta, we engage in collaboration, in cooperations that is transparent, that adopt good governance, and that is in line with our existing plan. So because we have plan for, grand plan for mobility, for example, it was already decided. I did not want to sort of come up with new idea that is inconsistent with the plan for long-term development of Jakarta. Because if we adopt that, it will be a challenge in the execution aspect.
We have a final question on the moving away from a car, moving towards a car light.
This area, the Kota Tua, Batavia, if you look at the pictures on the top, Bu Susana, can I stand here? This is the way it used to be. It was basically a road for cars. This used to be all for motorized. And then now, this is the area, it's all for pedestrian. We did it in stages, not all at once. In stages. 1, we make this area a low emission zone, February last year. Okay? Low emission zone. And it was, when we announced that, of course, the reaction was negative from those who live in this area. And we told them, be patient. If it's not working, we will revise it. But we believe you're not going to lose business. And what happened is they're making businesses. The business is not slowing down, actually. And then now, when we adopted this approach, they already see the opportunity by having it more for pedestrian. So our approach, pinjam. Our approach was this. Oh, this is the way it used to be. Now it's all this area for complete for pedestrian. I'll go on the TOD approach. This is to address your questions. We used to be car-oriented development, corridor-based. What does it corridor-based mean? If you live in an area with wide street, then you may be able to build high-rise. If your street is narrow, if you live in the lorong, in the gang, then you can only build low-rise. We switched that. If you live near the station, you will be able to build high-rise. So 800 meters as a perimeters from the stations, you will be able to build high-rise towers, high-rise building. So the approach needs to go beyond transportations. It needs to go on spatial planning. So on the spatial planning aspect, you need to reform that from corridor base into district base. And that obviously translates into high density and vertical because it is district based. And because of that, then you have an integrated transportations. Then because of that, you have a pedestrian. So you cannot only address transit oriented by talking only on the transportation aspect. You have to address the spatial planning because that's where the meat is. That's where many of the economic opportunity laid at.
Maybe we can take 1 to 2 more questions.
My name is Ernest Khan. I am the governing board member of Lee Kuan Yew School here. My question to you, Governor, knowing that the capital city of Jakarta, in terms of your administration, is to be moved over to Kalimantan. So as you look forward for Jakarta, with all these lessons learned, what will be the impact on Jakarta when that process is complete? Because then your capital city will be in a city in Kalimantan. And for the lessons that you have learned from building Jakarta, great work, Governor, for the last 5 years. How is that going to impact Jakarta going forward?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. I had the question also about the new capital. You asked it.
Thank you, Panis. My name is Janitra. I'm from Yogyakarta, actually. So I used to be in Gajah Mada University too. So yeah, I mean, but I was in IR. Yeah. So my question is also actually about. I was actually about to ask about the IKN, the Nusantara, and how it will affect Jakarta. Because I mean, all of this development, and now after this, if you have to move the capital, then that's something that you have to, that's probably going to affect Jakarta. But maybe I will ask about other thing that's probably hasn't been mentioned before, and that is to manage the expectation of the, or say, when you're running for government, and then you're running a city, you also have to manage expectations from groups and communities, right? And that will be reflected from your policy. So I know Jakarta has a lot of communities there and with many interests. How are you managing this so that you can provide a stable situation so that you can develop your city better? Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. Okay. The
Thank
young
you.
lady. Yep.
My name is Aisyah, I'm also from Indonesia. My question would be, how would you balance a city that cater both in the terms of social policy and infrastructure? I will give 3 examples. First is the pedestrian bridge in Sudirman Karet. In the shape, we know it's quite new, it's in the shape of Finisi, but it's not sheltered. If you see in Singapore, most of the walkways are sheltered, and it's very, very useful when you're walking, you're sheltered from the rain and from the sun. So it's been, I think some people have also pointed that out. So, and the second one would be public spaces. How would you create a public spaces? We know the case of Citayam Fashion Week. Sorry, public spaces.
I missed the first part.
Oh, the first part. How do you create a policy that balance social policy and infrastructure functions over design, for example? Second is the case of Citayam Fashion Week in the Sudirman area. How to provide these public spaces for the people without the law enforcement being too harsh on them and telling them to go home at 10 o'clock at night, for example. And also the third one is, I appreciate you building so many pedestrians. I see it with my own eyes in South Jakarta, West Jakarta, but I also see so many people still using it for parking, especially the cars. How would you encourage the law enforcement to balance this out, for these cars to stop using it for parking lot? Thank you.
Thank you. I think her question all centers around balance. How do you balance different things? Which is not easy, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you.
Saya berdiri situ aja nggak apa ya, jawabnya ya, lebih enak. It's been law of the land, so it's gonna take place. How that impact Jakarta? We can sort of look at it from several perspectives. But when it comes to transport, for example, how big is government activity contributed to traffic in Jakarta? If it is big, when they are relocating, our traffic will be better, right? So it's good for Jakarta, right? If they're relocating. But the problem is, it only contributed 4%. 4% of traffic in Jakarta is government related. So what are the biggest chunk? Household and business. We have 14.5 million deliveries per day in our city. Delivery meaning, the deliveries of food or delivery products, 14.5 million. And we have another PR that is not yet addressed, which is the numbering of our address system. You have one road, one number 2, and then the next is number 20. Okay? And then next is number 30, right? That's happening. We're not addressing that issue yet, step by step. But when it comes to activity, major activity in Jakarta is actually non-governmental. So when it comes to relocations of our capital, we are going to be center of Indonesian economy still. We still contribute 17-18% of our GDP. That's not going to change. And we will see more government employee moving to East Kalimantan. And I believe that the development of Nusantara will not repeat the mistake that we made. We used to be corridor-based development, car-based development. I think over there will be more public transport, more pedestrian to begin with. So I think there are many lessons learned. Why that is the case? Let me underline the difference here. Relocating its capital and building new capital, that's two different things. People always talk about Indonesia is going to relocate its capital. No, we are not only relocating, we are going to build a new capital. Relocation, example is from Bonn to Berlin. That's called relocation, okay? From Istanbul to Ankara, that's called relocation. But from Jakarta to Nusantara, it means constructing new city. And that's not going to finish in the next 2, 3, 4 years. That's going to take quite some time to complete. During that period, Indonesians were very skillful in adjustment. So don't worry, we will adjust it quickly. Adjusting, that's our skill. We'll adjust it quickly. So we're not worried. And Jakarta is always, I would say, a disappointment to a pessimist. So we'll continue to be a vibrant city. And then on managing expectations. Expectation varies. That's why I put on the board the top 4 highest expectations from public. Addressing cost of living, addressing education issue, addressing health issues, but the expectation varies from one place to another. What we're trying to do here is that address the top priority with all resources, but other challenges need to be addressed as well. Flood, for example. Jakarta is known for having floods. We have 3 fronts to tackle here. In the coastal area, you have the rise of sea levels, and then we have water coming in from the highlands. Even Jakarta is dry. If the highlands have a heavy rain, all these 13 rivers was going to, often overflow are happening. Our capacity of rivers in Jakarta is 2,300 meter cubic per second. At the normal time, that's happening around 1,800 to 1,900 at normal time, which is below our capacity. But our capacity is 2,300. However, in the heavy rain, it can reach up to 3,200 meter cubic per second. Very high. And then local rains. Our drainage system, the capacity is 100 millimeter rain per day. That's the capacity of our drainage system. And the extreme rain that we had in January 2020, the rain was 377 millimeters per day, almost 4 times the capacity. Obviously, we'll have flood. So our approach in managing that expectations, this is also interesting. The middle class expected flood to be tackled, but the middle class never experienced flood. So those who have the expectations were not those who experienced the problem. But if you go to Kampung, they will not talk about flood. They will talk about cost of living. They're going to talk about health and education. But we need to address that. And so our approach is, and this is the way I also work in Jakarta, we always have session of discussion. And answering to your questions about how to make the bureaucrats continue our programs. This is when I started my job in the Balai Kota, I come to the Ruang Rapim. Ruang Rapim is the meeting room for the leadership. When I came there, I look around and I said, there is no whiteboard here. I said, yeah, they didn't have whiteboard. So is this a discussion room or instruction room? If this is a place for meeting, you have to have a whiteboard because it shows that you're going to have a discussion. So the way I run the management in the cities is I ask questions and I ask everyone to answer that questions. How do we tackle flood? And then everyone will share their idea. And I give them questions. How much the capacity of a dam, for example? And then the answer was no one knows the capacity of our dam. We have more than 100 dam in the cities, more than 100. And we did not have data on the capacity of our dam. So even the water was there, we didn't know how much sludge is inside, how much we need to do dredging. So ask questions and let them answer, and that's how we manage. So I also ask these simple questions. How do we measure a success in handling flood? And everybody was thinking, how do you measure success in handling flood? Flood is flood. Yeah, I know. Flood is flood. But how do you measure a success in handling flood? And they had difficulties it was true story, because we didn't have KPI. So I said, there is no way we work without KPI. So let's set up a KPI. 1, no death. That's number 1. Everyone must survive. 0 death. That's the first KPI. Number 2, it has to be dry how many hours after the rain stops. If the capacity is 100 millimeter rain per day, and the water coming in is 200, it will be flood. It will be flooded, right? That's a fact. But the question is, how many hours does it take to make it dry again? And then everyone discuss it, and they come to conclusion, 6 hours. That's not my instructions. That's the conclusions of all the technocrats who had experience in managing waters in Jakarta. And they come up with the number of 6. So 6 is not a decision by governor. The governor asks questions. They have the experience, they have the knowledge, and very practical. So it becomes our KPI now. Whenever there is a rain, and it's over the capacity, 6 hours after it stops, it has to be dry. And nowadays, when you see a flood, very, very fast, you'll get it dry immediately. Last year, there was a flood in Kemang, or beginning of this year, and within less than 6 hours, it's dry again. Why that is the case? Because the lurah, the camat, the wali kota were bringing in resources to pump the water. The fire truck were being sent, the tank for watering the parks were being sent. So many resources were being pulled to make sure it dry within 6 hours. If it didn't reach the target, it will mark in their KPI. And their KPI is linked to their salary. Because Jakarta's employees making good money already. So you need to link it to performance. Now, Asia, ya tadi. Asia, thank you. Very good questions. Why the JPO, or the pedestrian walk, didn't have a shelter? Aisha, instead, it's interesting. I actually was the one who asked all the shelters to be removed. Yeah. I asked them to be removed. And it's not like I asked them immediately. This is my question was this. I always ask questions. I don't give instruction. I ask questions. The question was this. Why do we need to have a roof here in the pedestrian pedestrian bridge? Well, to protect you from rain and sun during daytime. But you're coming from an area that has no shelter anyway. The sidewalk, both sides, has no shelter. So you're walking from an outdoor to an outdoor. Why do you need an indoor in between? If you're connecting the bridge from inside to outside, that's different. Why that is the question? Why I ask that questions? Because of this. The beauty of Jalan Sudirman is up in the sky. Okay? When you are crossing the bridge and there is shelter, it basically blocks your view. The experience is, in fact, when you are enjoying the upper side of Jalan Sudirman, not the lower side of Jalan Sudirman. And most of us who rode cars, many of us were driving in the back seat. And in the back seat, you don't enjoy Jalan Sudirman. It's your driver that enjoys Jalan Sudirman because they can see all the high-rise buildings and everything. So I asked that questions to come to conclusion that we will and then remove, so that we can give experience to our residents of the uniqueness of Jalan Sudirman. In other area, when we connect buildings, then it has to be sheltered because you're walking from indoor to outdoor. You will be seeing in Jalan Sudirman when it is a bus stop for Transjakarta, for transit, then it is with shelter because they're moving out of the bus, transferring to another bus, then it is sheltered because you're connecting from indoor to outdoor. So in fact, the idea is to create a space that people can feel togetherness, and that's sort of the objective. And in fact, I always said, behind hard infrastructure idea, there has to be sociological purpose to be achieved. So behind the building of transportations, we're talking about creating the feeling of unity in our city, the feeling of equality in our city. Same thing with pedestrian. And same thing with a pedestrian bridge. It creates the feeling of equality in there. So I hope I address your issues. And then on law enforcement, the Citayam Fashion Week was a unique case on that. Okay, I don't want to say that's a unique case, and it was only happening during school holidays. Once the school holidays is over, then the fashion week is over. So it was not only because the law enforcement, but because holiday was over, they're no longer coming to the area. And this is also one thing that we experience in Indonesia, that policing under the police authority is different than the local government authority. So linking the two is not always easy at the operational level. Okay, often it didn't go along very well. The last one was about parking. Yes, I mean, this is what I mentioned earlier. This is a challenge that we are still facing. We keep giving tickets. We keep giving basically tickets, and it is quite expensive. 500,000 per day if your car is being towed. It is expensive actually, and if you have your car for 2-3 days, it'll cost you quite a large sum of money. So we're doing enforcement all the time, but it is a learning process for everyone, because many of us still looking at any space or parking space. And the same thing with garbage can. One day, Susanna, I had a minister taking our MRT. And then after she took the MRT, we met, and then she said, "Pak Anies, the MRT was so good, except one thing." What is that, Bu? It didn't have enough garbage can, waste can. There is no enough, tidak ada tempat sampah, kurang tempat sampah. And then I mentioned, it was designed without tempat sampah. There is no tempat sampah in the MRT. And I said, really? Yeah, there is no tempat sampah. So if we have sampah, take it in your pocket. Bring it home, bring it to the office. But that's an education process that we need to sort of embark. It'll take some time for people. Now, if you take MRT, people realize there is no place to put your waste. You have to take your waste along. And I often said, your waste doesn't mean garbage. Some waste are never garbage. Some waste are actually recyclable, and you can keep it. And some are garbage. But this concept need to be educated. There's a process of habituations to make it a habit, and one day become a culture to us. We'll see when that happens. Again, thank you very much for all the questions and your attentions.
So we do have to draw it to a hard close because Pak Anies has to go for dinner and then he has to rush for some other meetings. I thank all of you for the questions. I'm glad that many of the questions came from the students. You can see public policy decision-making in action. My own personal view is Jakarta is an amazing case study in its transformation, particularly over the last few years. And that's what you're seeing here is actually a live case. So thank you, Pak Anies, for spending the time this evening with us at the school. We truly appreciate it. Everyone, can you join me in thanking Pak Anies Baswedan?
Thank you, Zaina. Thank you.